Hi, my name is Reba Hervis, Artistic Director at Overshadowed Theatrical Productions. Welcome to this week's episode From the Wings with two of my most favorite people. We have
Rebecca Leland,
Angelo,
and behind the camera, who you cannot see, we have today Kaylee Sell. Thank you guys for joining
Absolutely.
me. We recently went to see 1776 at the Marriott Theater in Lincolnshire, Illinois. First of all, had either one of you ever seen it?
Nope, never.
I haven't. No, I didn't even hear about it. I didn't even know what it was.
Now, there is something very significant about the way that Marriott is doing this show that we'll talk about later. I don't want to talk about it yet. I want to talk about just the musical by itself. I have heard about it for years and years and years, and I've always been a little bit intrigued by it. I also had not seen it. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to be bored out of my mind listening to just people banter about and talk about how we're going to all agree on how we're going to write this document for the new country.
I went in with low expectations. And it was similar to you. Like, I thought, I've seen historical dramas before, and I don't particularly like them. But because, it's been around, and people are like, oh, this is a good show, I was like, all right. So I went in with low expectations, and honestly enjoyed it. And I think that's because I was expecting sort of a slower...
You don't think you would have liked it if you had expected more?
If I had gone in, I think, with higher expectations, I don't know that I would have gotten the same thing out of it.
I loved it. I thought it was going to be boring, too. I was like, I don't know what they're going to do with this.
And then, politics.
It was my first theater in the round experience. Ever.
You had never been there before?
Never. And never in a theater round in general. So I walked in, I was like, no set. So I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Yeah. I loved it. I thought it was so well done. But I don't think I would love all theater in the rounds, but I thought because it was like the room where it happened kind of a feeling, it worked very well.
It is very inviting in that environment. Because you feel like you're part of, and especially the way it's set up, you feel like you're part of the Congress.
The minute I walked in, I was so taken by... So sometimes Marriott doesn't have a lot of stuff on the stage when you walk in.
Right.
But this particular time, they have the levels, and they had all the chairs, and they had the table, and they had the sign hanging down where you could see the votes as each state cast their vote. And I would say, really, there's not a bad seat in the house. Yeah. Almost ever, always. But for this particular time... There is a table that sits in the middle, and that character, do you remember who sat at the table? I'm trying to remember. John Hancock. How could I forget that? He didn't write his name big enough for me. He pretty much sits with his back to the other side. He doesn't get up and walk around as much as most of them. And so I think if people were sitting on the other side where he is, they're not getting as great of a view.
Yeah, whenever they're taking votes and stuff, depending on where you're sitting, you're either behind them or in front of them. But I didn't think there was a bad seat, like you said.
Right.
And I feel like where we were, we kind of got John Hancock's back. But then when Jefferson had the song with his wife about the violin, that was like facing us.
It was all for us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We got a private show.
So going in with no expectations, I loved every bit of it. I very rarely feel the urge to stand up for a standing ovation. When I do, I usually do it because everybody is standing around me, and I feel like, oh, well, I guess I'm going to stand up. I don't want to be a snot. But most of the time, I do not feel like anything is so brilliantly done that it just moves me, and that one did. I love the acting.
Yeah.
I love the singing. I love the story. It moved. It caught me up. It engaged me. Yeah. And so much so, and I think you know this about me because we've had other things that we've done this for. The minute I got in the car, I was doing all kinds of research to see if there was anything that didn't happen.
I did that too. So in the script, the guy who wrote it, Sherman Edwards, I guess had a really hard time getting the script produced because people didn't believe in the story. They thought it was going to be boring. Wow. And so he actually had to do a lot of the research on his own and then basically start the musical himself. He wrote the songs, he wrote the initial script, and then brought it to someone else to kind of clean up the script and make it more engaging. It's interesting because in the script, he actually has like a really long explanation about what things they changed. For instance, like Jefferson wasn't newly married, which is something they say in the show. He had been married for a little bit longer. Or like the sign you mentioned wasn't actually up there, but it's a nice visual cue for the audience.
And we needed it.
Right.
Yeah.
You're like, who's voting what?
And actually, I was counting. So I'm like looking up there watching the sign.
Next,
and I'm like, okay, well, for this to be a tie, who's going to... I mean, I was so...
And it's a good bit of like dramatic tension too, of like seeing, like, is it going to
And hearing the click.
Yeah.
So there are little things like that, or like they consolidated certain characters, like there were more people in Congress than what they show on stage. Looking through the list, I didn't think there was anything glaring where you'd be like, this isn't really how it happened.
Right,
It was
right.
more stylistic changes, which you know, they kind of have to do because they're dramatizing real life.
Well, and I think that that's good for us because, again, if part of what theater does is it educates and inspires, it is so interesting for me to think about that time in history and be open to a world that I haven't even really thought about before. And the thing that I think is such an interesting lesson for us is that even back in the very beginning, when you think of men that were so unified. I mean, that's the way I have always thought about it in my failing as a history student, is that these men got together and said, we are being abused by Britain, so we're going to form a country and this is what we're going to do. I kind of felt like everybody was on the same page and we were going to just go, right?
No.
I did not even think about all the tension, and it shows you that human nature never changes. So even when you want the best for your country, and I think it kind of gives hope for our country today too, that we have people who have different things, but in the end, there's a Bible verse that says, the heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord, and amen, it is, right? And America was formed.
Yeah, and though they weren't unified, they got unified by doing what? Healthy debate. It was a healthy space where they could debate.
Right.
And they had that moment, and they were able to get to a resolution, but it was only through, what, like an hour and a half of debating.
Costumes. Can we talk about costumes?
Yeah.
Let's talk about them. We were talking about them.
Were you? No, I thought they were breathtaking. There's one really pink, satiny,
amazing,
beautiful.
Yeah, North Carolina, right?
I think it was North Carolina, which, you know, I probably noticed because I was like, I want to be from North Carolina.
And he like stood up on the table at one point.
So gorgeous.
Incredible.
Breathtaking, really. There's a very famous painting of that setting, and in my mind I felt like, oh yes, they captured that beautifully. It's funny though, because when I went back and looked at the painting, I was like, oh look, they have a lot of really dark colors.
That's so funny.
For me, it created a picture in my mind that made me go, oh yeah, they got that.
Wow, almost an enhanced version of it.
Yes, right.
And it seemed like it was purposeful because I think the Republicans were wearing shades of red, and then the Democrats were wearing shades of blue. So the costuming, while maybe like, you know, for someone who's a staunch historian who'd go and be like, oh, this isn't right, it did add to their characters and helped establish who they were. So I think when you're going to the theater for an experience like that, you expect something like that where you're going to be engaging in a character.
Right, it wasn't unauthentic. I think that it felt right.
All right, so now let's talk about the elephant in the room. What did Marriott do that was different than most productions of 1776? Who wants to tell our audience what they did?
I want to do it.
Okay.
They had women playing prominent male roles.
What?
Yep.
What did you think about that? Well, okay.
What did you precede? Yeah,
what did you think you were going to think about?
I was like, these little political, they are out here, like feminism. I mean, there just be these women being like men. They are having a point. Basically, I was so ready to watch it. Like, even sitting down, I was like, this is going to be so fun to tear apart.
And I was kind of in the same boat because there was a revival years ago that did it in New York that used all women, and they were very intentional about casting, you know, diverse voices and all of that. Wow. And so they were making a political statement.
I got lost in not being like, oh, this is a woman speaking like a man. I got lost into like, no, this is the character speaking, and this is the emotion they're bringing.
And it felt like Shakespeare in that way of like where men would play women's parts, but they wouldn't be a woman. You know, like it was very understood they were playing a woman. And so I think in that way it was almost like women were playing the part of a man. They weren't trying to change anything.
And playing them well. Right. Like actually being a good actress to where I believed
How exciting was it, I think, for people like Heidi and some of the other women who got to play these men, these juicy male roles that, you know, you normally don't get to do as a woman, but they were allowed to do it and they did it brilliantly.
Yeah.
Well, I was a little disappointed because I always go to things and think, okay, I'm going to look at it and see if this is something I could do. Overshadow cannot do it, sadly. I think there's just a little bit too much cavorting going on and a little bit too explicit. I mean, I think that those men back then were indeed like that. I don't think it was making anything up from history.
But is it a wholesome?
But it's not a wholesome thing. And certain of the conversations were just a little bit too explicit, I think, for our audiences, and so it would not be one I would choose to do.
I was disappointed. John Adams took the Lord's name in vain a lot.
Yes.
That was
a
like
lot.
a catchphrase.
Yeah.
Luckily for you guys, this production plays at Marriott until October the 13th. You have plenty of time to go online and get a ticket and then call us and tell us what you think. 1776.
So good.
So
Wait,
good.
what would you rate it?
I think I'd give it a 9.
I would give it a
Wow.
10 out of 10.
See, I'd go 8.
An 8.
An 8. I enjoyed it. I don't know that I'd see it again. I think that's why I give it an 8.
I think I would definitely see it again. Maybe not now. Maybe I need a little bit of time. But I also am a little afraid that nobody else will do it as well as Marriott did. They did
agree.
a really brilliant
Fantastic.
They did do a good job.
Yeah.
job. 8, 9, 10. We want to know what you think. Until next time, this is just me
And me.
And me.
talking to you
From
the
wings.
Don't be afraid to just call me. Yeah. No?
Ba-dum-bum.
Yeah.
Da, da, da,
And I'll be around.
No.
No.